Gregor, can you hear them?
By the end of the first game, Cooking Companions, we learn the protagonist has been a witch who has been killing lost travelers for decades or even centuries, luring them into her cabin to eat them. Decades pass after the events of the first game, and the Wicked Witch of the East terrorizes many towns starting from Zakopane, a mountainside town in Poland, which leads to Poland and many neighboring countries tremble in fear by the name of the Witch of the East. From the prequel, Cooking Companions, we saw the horrifying way the witch lured her victims into an isolated cabin in the forest, slowly and painfully killing them one by one to feed on them, manipulating and psychologically tormenting her victims not to only break them, but to entertain herself as well. She of course also used this technique as she grew very old and feeble, not being her older self, capable of killing so many in one go. Towards the end of the first game, the witch having the souls of a few victims of herself accompanying her and hunting her, one stays with her, represented as a food ingredient, Potato, who happens to be a psychotic serial killer himself, inciting the witch to go on terrorizing more towns and be the culprit of many massacres. The witch, being labeled as Baba Yaga, one of the oldest and ferocious witches known to humanity, starts becoming old and feeble, with her powers weakening, her memory failing her, and starting to become softer and more empathetic towards the lives that she has taken. Blanking out many times, forgetting who she is, where she is, she finds herself suddenly in a cabin with a man known as Jarek present there, claiming that he knows everyone in Zakopane, depicting that she is somewhere close to her cabin. At first, Jarek seems friendly and offers help to the protagonist, worried about her, as there's a storm outside and the protagonist seems lost and in dire need for food and shelter. At first, we might think the protagonist is different to the Witch of the East or the protagonist of the first game, but this turns out to be a trick pulled by Jarek as he lies to the witch in order to fetch his gun and kill her, knowing she's the witch, the one who terrorized many towns and killed hundreds, if not thousands, prosecuted by a famous brave judge. Jarek, driven by justice and equally if not more by the desire for fame, he shoots her, wanting to kill the notorious and frightening Witch of the East to make a name for himself. But unfortunately, the gun doesn't work on her, making her just black out and go on a brutal feast, ripping Jarek apart using a knife. Suddenly, with her consciousness returning to her, finding herself in the middle of a forest not too far from her cabin.
Mariah, Anatoly, Gregor, can you hear them?
That's when Potato tells her that she has been sleepwalking and terrorizing residents in the forest, being a horrifying sight for the bystanders, yet something Potato seems to have enjoyed. He continues on that someone has stolen her horse, someone that she needs to pay a little visit and punish, and if she is lucky enough, there might be even more people in the mansion of the thief, whom she can feed on. Just the thought of eating the flesh of people makes her mouth water, setting on a journey to get to this mansion, which seems to be in a different country. Potato excited for a new adventure full of terror and death, hoping for the bloodiest altercations and drama. A note left behind depicts how the culprit who stole her horse is extremely apologetic, not wanting an altercation with the witch, as anyone in their right mind would try to steer clear from the witch. I know you're still upset about Ivan. I'm asking the impossible. But please, forgive me, and let's end this madness. I'm asking you, please, to let this one die.
Raina.
Just as a witch gets on her way to punish this person, disregarding the apology letter, a familiar entity appears, or better known as Raspberry, someone who doesn't want to see more people die and suffer. She pleads with the witch to stop and not go to the mansion, trying to discourage her further, that this person is unlike any that she has met before, being someone with more superhuman abilities, someone who knows forbidden alchemy, being almost a match for the witch, someone who is accompanied by 3 others who are very capable as well. The witch, who doesn't think with her mind but rather with her stomach, dismisses Raspberry and goes on this new adventure.
Can you hear them?
The scene changes with a new protagonist being introduced, someone who regains her consciousness in a forest, seeing the extended hand of someone called Kurt, the owner of a mansion, accompanied by 3 others. Kurt offering help to this lost stranger in need of shelter, he takes her to his mansion where he introduces his companions. Renata is his business partner who is responsible for bookkeeping and doing the accounting and paperwork. Dmitri is the scientist doctor who performs scientific experiments and makes sure everyone is in peak health condition. And finally, Gisela, who is a mighty and strong bodyguard, keeping Kurt safe from any dangerous intruders or angry competitors who have before attempted assassinating him. This reveals Kurt is a powerful man, well known and very important, someone who has made enemies throughout his life in pursuit of money and gathering a large wealth, yet being very strange to how young he is, as one would think achieving what he has would take decades. Dmitri, feeling as if the protagonist is parched, offers a glass of water, which she takes happily. As she drinks the glass of water, she feels a tingling sensation at the back of her throat, realizing she swallowed a strand of hair. Feeling a little uneasy, she quickly dismisses it, feeling as if it's a normal accidental occurrence, something that wasn't done intentionally. Seemingly taking place in a remote and isolated island in Germany, close to Stralsund, Kurt explains that he is far from any police or hospital, with the earliest response taking hours at best, hence why he needs a bodyguard to keep him safe and a doctor. They even explain how Gisela killed an intruder after tying them up rather than calling the police, as the police would not arrive anytime soon. Not long after, they reveal that they had to get the protagonist across some waters, meaning that they picked her up from somewhere different and took her to this remote, dilapidated mansion in an isolated island. Things become even more bizarre when the telephone starts ringing, with Kurt instructing her to answer it. As the protagonist shrugs it off, not concerned with all the red flags, she goes to pick up the telephone, which seems to be some sort of prank call as no one answers on the other side. As the protagonist tries to leave, going back to the foyer to get back to the group, a talking duck appears out of thin air, introducing himself as Maximilian. Max explains that he's been trapped in this mansion for a long time and wants to go somewhere warm, but for that, the mysterious box next to the telephone needs to be opened. Max warns the protagonist that she should leave with Max as well, as the quicker they find a way out, the better for the both of them, as this mansion is not what she thinks it is. Goosebumps unintentionally forming on her skin, feeling extremely uneasy and concerned, the duck suddenly wishes her luck, saying to watch out for the witch before leaving. Walking cautiously back to the foyer, meeting with the group, Kurt quickly leaves, saying that he needs to attend to his work. The group suddenly starts speaking fondly of him, as if he is their cult leader or has somehow put them under some sort of a spell. The group soon separates, leaving the protagonist to feel at home. Here she has the choice to talk to different characters, with each having unique dialogue. Choosing to speak to Kurt, the protagonist pressures him to speak and explain what he really does and wants to do. I've gathered my wealth through investments and gradual dividends. Being a scientist paid well, and I can show you the lab. I mean, next week, as it's not clean now. I've chosen each one of you for a specific quality you've shown. You for your courage in dangerous situations. Dangerous situations like meeting me. Oh, just joking. My research is mixing chemistry and biology, or alchemy, to test different scenarios on people. I mean, to advance science. Kurt, clearly hiding something, doesn't want to say what he's really doing here and how he's affording all of this. Just then, a loud sound of a door breaking open distracts the both of them, going down to the foyer to find out what it is. The scene cuts to the witch's perspective, arriving at the mansion, being the exact same mansion Kurt owns. The witch grips her knife harder when Potato reveals what the surprise he promised the witch is. He has managed to gather all the chumpets, the group of vegetables and food items who each represent a different victim's soul. Potato reveals he is the new leader, dictating chumpets of what to say or do, revealing that he threatened them with a knife, with the next vote for a new leader taking place 1,000 years later. Potato explains the witch's mind has become older and softer, with many holes which they need to fill now and guide her the right way. This unfortunately means with the Potato's leadership, the witch will be more brutal and bloodthirsty. Potato makes a deal with the witch. If she butchers everyone in the mansion, he will make the others go away and not torment her or hunt her anymore, as otherwise she will suffer for eternity. The witch then goes on to break the mansion's door, deciding to kill every single person there to finally get to Kurt. That's when the perspective changes back to the other protagonist, with Kurt explaining the cursed one has broken their locks and is most likely inside the mansion, with everyone being prepared. The protagonist, being confused, asks who they're talking about when Kurt explains the Witch of the East, Baba Yaga from Poland. Baba Yaga terrorized the world in the old days, but as she grew old, she stayed in her cabin and waited for lost travelers to go there for shelter, making it easy for her as her food came to her. But as we know from the last game, Potato convinced her to leave her cabin and commit massacres and terrorize the towns, cities, and countries just like the old times. Decades ago, something happened. She left her home like the old days, traveling across the globe. The first city she terrorized was Zakopane in Poland. It was horrific. She broke down doors with her bare hands, chewing her way inside homes and businesses. It rained for 100 days after she arrived at the city, turning the city into an inhabitable wetland. Any survivors who attempted to escape were hunted down. Only a handful of people remained by the end. This massacre was then known as the Summer of Rain. Kurt then instructs the protagonist to fortify the mansion and use weapons stashed around in case the witch attacks them. With the Witch of the East in the mansion, the situation becomes very tense and strange, depicting how Kurt is the alchemist of the forbidden texts, someone who is almost as powerful as the witch, someone not to be trusted. The protagonist going around to run some errands and prepare for the witch, she meets another entity to be a talking rabbit known as Clover. Clover tries to convince the protagonist that the witch is a livid creature, someone who will savagely rip everyone apart. The only way to survive is through giving her what she wants, which is the corpse of Kurt, as she has some bad blood with him. It seems as if the rabbit also has some bad blood with Kurt, as she wants him dead. Nonetheless, her suggestion seems to be logical and reasonable, even though cruel and dark. The protagonist goes on to catch up with Gisela and help her fortify the windows and doors. Going back to the rest of the group, Kurt suggests finding some weapons, where the protagonist has the choice to whether go to the room with Renata or to the basement with Dmitri. Whoever is left alone dies and becomes a victim to the witch. Going with Dmitri, they fail to find any weapon, thinking the witch got rid of them. That's when they rejoin the group, seeing that Renata has disappeared with blood smeared upstairs. Kurt then pushes the protagonist to go upstairs and find fuses and switches in order to reconnect the electricity. That's when she goes up and finds a letter which talks about a mysterious woman who has been sending letters and would go after certain scientists, politicians, and police. The author informs them to put a stop to her, as she wouldn't stop for the author's sake and these powerful people. It seems as if this letter is written by Kurt, who in fact works with powerful corrupt people, giving them the results of his twisted research and experiments, and the identity of the mysterious woman who has been sending letters to expose Kurt and the corrupt people still remains a mystery. That's when the ghost of Renata attacks the protagonist, with the perspective changing to the witch. Cabbage comes to the witch, telling her to be careful around the mansion, as Kurt is a lot more capable than she thinks, and one wrong move could lead to her death. The witch asks Cabbage, especially that they're alone, to why she stepped down from being the leader, when she explains it wasn't her who chose to, but it was because of the witch who left them all alone at the cabin, choosing to go on a killing spree with Potato. It's just that she has forgotten about them. Despite the witch being a bloodthirsty killer, hearing this from Cabbage, a longtime companion, she can't help but shed tears. Cabbage tells her to wipe her tears, clearly having developed some sort of friendship and connection despite being a victim to her, as they have now spent decades together, with the witch clearly being softer and less cruel, feeling for her friends who have been hunting her for the most recent part of her life. The witch then wipes her tears while shaking, gripping her knife very tightly, then stands back up to complete her mission and kill Kurt. The perspective then changes, with the protagonist finding herself on a bed with Kurt sleeping next to her and watching her closely. Feeling extremely uncomfortable, she asks what's going on when Kurt explains that she passed out after seeing the ghost and that he was monitoring her vitals when he started feeling sleepy and wanted to take a nap. After speaking to Kurt, the protagonist goes down to the foyer to speak to Gisela. Gisela preps the protagonist in case that she sees the witch, leaving after some time to check on the electricity as the lights are playing up. All of a sudden, a strange woman appears out of nowhere. A young woman in her 20s dressed in traditional Polish clothing. The protagonist instantly becomes frozen in her place, not able to move, stuttering, asking this woman if she is the intruder, to which she amusingly says yes, but that the protagonist has nothing to fear as she is here for Kurt. The witch reveals that she doesn't want to kill Gisela and finds her to be challenging, hence wanting her to move out of the mansion on her own will, but if not, she wouldn't mind doing it forcibly. She simply requests to face Kurt on his own, as she needs to confront him. She reveals that they go back a long time, as Kurt was like a friend to her who ended up betraying her. Going to speak to Dmitri, the protagonist learns that he comes from East, possibly Russia or Eastern Europe. Dmitri explains that the telephone is bugged, with the culprit being none other than Kurt, who seems to be controlling everyone in the mansion. Kurt even patronizes Dmitri and doesn't listen to him, dismissing his speeches, treating him as if he isn't important beyond what Kurt needs him for. From what Dmitri talks about, it's likely that the time period is during American-Vietnam War, possibly being in the 70s or 60s, a few decades after the first game. It also becomes clear that the protagonist is an American, making it even stranger to what she's doing in a remote island in Germany. They move on to the kitchen to explore the place and maybe find some weapons to defend themselves against the witch. In the meantime, the perspective changes to the witch, who gets approached by the Brit, who quietly tells her that she needs to go back to the cabin, but as the potato starts waking up from his sleep in her hair, Brett cracks a joke in fear and moves on from what he said. The witch subsequently decides to go to the kitchen to grab a snack as she's starting to get hungry. While in there, the protagonist tries to burn certain items that she collected to see what's inside them. If choosing the wrong item, the ghost of Renata attacks her again, leading to her passing out from fear or even dying. She regains her consciousness, seeing Kurt sleeping next to her on the bed again, who is horrific and has a monstrous look, telling her that he knows her memories are coming back, and if she ever speaks to the witch again, he will bury her himself. This in a way reveals that Kurt is hiding something, and he seems to have done something to really anger the witch. Kurt seems to be somehow controlling the people in the mansion, even to the point of making them lose their memories. This turns out to be a dream, as it shifts to another perspective, with Kurt speaking to the protagonist in a vulnerable state, saying how he is immortal, someone who died from a sickness, a very painful sickness, which was eventually cured when he was resurrected. The protagonist eventually wakes up, finding Gisela sleeping next to her, who explains how Kurt's memories at times could leak into hers, revealing these dreams are in fact true, being memories of Kurt. Therefore, the dream that she had earlier about Kurt being trapped by the witch who fed her poisonous and deadly mushrooms were also true, which could explain Kurt had an incurable disease which was cured by the witch, killing him and then resurrecting him. Sadly, Dmitri is assumed to be killed by the witch, as they only found blood and not his body. Moving on to find Kurt, who seems to be acting paranoid and irrationally now, maybe due to fear. The protagonist encounters the duck again, Max, who informs her that she shouldn't trust Clover the rabbit, as she only wants Kurt dead so that she can steal his research papers, not really caring about the safety of anyone. And it's not very clear what she wants to do with his research, but whatever it is, doesn't seem to be good. That's when Kurt appears from behind, confessing that he incited someone to steal one of the witch's horses, hence why she's angry at him. This makes the protagonist admit what he has done is a crime, and he must have done many other criminal things, which makes Kurt stutter and shake in fear, asking the protagonist if she's remembering. He quickly moves on from the topic, saying how they need to prepare for the witch. That's when the protagonist plans to go on and find the bird trap to use against the witch, going down to the cellar where it leads to two different rooms. One of the rooms has an old throne in it, where the protagonist finds a letter of a humanitarian aid to the Soviet-occupied land, which the mansion and the island seems to fall under. Soviet seems to have been refusing this humanitarian aid, which consisted of food, with the offer made in 1953. The other room seems to be an old laboratory with old chemicals which Kurt had possibly used in the past. Not finding the bird trap, she goes up to the bedroom where she finds a secret letter addressed to Kurt. It's written by an unnamed author who seems to have been having a relationship with Kurt, suggested by the subtext on how they loved him, revealing a sinister secret that Kurt had wiped Renata's memories, committing many more atrocities through his research and inhumane experiments. The perspective changes to the witch when Onion comes to her, saying how it was the right choice to kill Dmitri and Renata as they are just like Kurt, expanding that they would come back and be resurrected if their spirits were not separated from the bodies. This explains that Kurt probably made them immortal and conducted experiments on them, then wiping their memories to control them, hence why they couldn't leave the mansion. The perspective changes back to the protagonist, who has fallen through a hole. There she gets approached by Clover, who threatens her, saying that she needs to kill Kurt, as she would punish and torture her if not, displaying her true sinister intentions. Clover then guides the protagonist to go to the kitchen, which is past the two rooms in the cellar, instructing her to make haste before Gisela and Kurt come to the foyer. Following Clover's instructions, she manages to go up, missing both Gisela and Kurt, going up to the bedroom when she gets attacked by Renata's soul. The perspective changes yet again, with the witch talking to Raspberry about finding a fifth person whom she wasn't aware of, talking about the American protagonist. During this interaction, Raspberry pleads with the witch to go back to the cabin in Poland and stay there, as she has already done much damage and she will continue on doing more and more. On the other hand, Potato wakes up and acts in opposition to Raspberry, saying the witch needs to kill Kurt as he knows too much and will expose her, and that he is not a good human, someone who will have a reign of terror himself. Potato seems to enjoy Witch's massacres and encourages her to do more, while Raspberry wants it all to end. Choosing to side with Raspberry, going back to her cabin, she descends into the basement where she is confronted by the spirit of Raina, who is represented by Raspberry, bringing the story to an end. But of course, this is not really what happened. This would only be a case if the witch would hypothetically choose to go back to the cabin abandoning her mission. The perspective changes yet again, showing the past when Renata lost their memories and was experimented on. According to the letter we found and what is discussed, Renata seems to have been imprisoned, where she suffered immensely, both physically and mentally, to the point that she would do anything to forget those awful memories. It's not clear who she was imprisoned by, but most likely under Soviet control. She begs Kurt to wipe her memories, even dismissing the severe side effects it would have, making a brain-dead individual, someone with a lack of ability to express herself fully, losing her personality and character, and losing not only the present time memories, but also other memories formed throughout years, and even possibly her own name. In exchange, Kurt asks her to do his accounting papers, as he reveals he in fact is bankrupt and would be arrested if his paperwork is not done properly. This explains why the mansion is in such a bad state of disrepair, and Kurt doesn't have anyone taking care of it apart from these 3 people who seem to be all experimented on by Kurt. The scene then changes to a cutscene where Kurt and Dmitri are talking in secrecy. Kurt is forcing Dmitri to perform a procedure never done before, a procedure which would make a specific woman inhuman. Despite Dmitri refusing to do it as it's not safe, Kurt is adamant and threatens him, saying how he will do it himself otherwise and will mess it up, explaining that's the only way to keep specific people out of the island. Kurt displays his lack of care and sympathy, saying how he is simply a tool to advance his knowledge, using her for his own gains, even saying he would lock her up in the basement and offer her to the witch if the experiment doesn't go well. For now, this mysterious woman's identity remains unidentified, someone who seems to be important to keep in order Kurt is found out for his crimes. The scene changes with the protagonist talking to Gisela, who explains how she lost an eye fighting the witch who moved on and stabbed Kurt, then running away, even though Kurt seems to be completely unharmed, as if he's immune to stabbing. Gisela further explains how her memories started coming back, remembering how she butchered and killed many people under the commands of Kurt, what she is not happy about, displaying how her personality had been altered to be a senseless killing machine with no sympathy. She seems to have been also experimented on by Kurt to become like this. That's when she leaves and the witch approaches her, saying how she only took out Gisela's eye in self-defense. She further explains Gisela is starting to remember and will most likely leave on her own will, as she is nothing but a mere test subject, and Kurt and Dmitri are the only friends. The protagonist also mentions how she is starting to remember her true story and who she really is, saying how she will arrest Kurt, which starts to unravel the mystery to who she is. It seems this American protagonist is one of the people Kurt was worried about, the people he wanted to keep out of the island, using Renata to hide the documents and evidence against them, and Gisela for protection and killing any investigators. As time passes, meeting with Gisela again, she explains how the memories are flooding back, realizing that she has no chance against the witch, deciding to leave the island, even if it takes miles of swimming in the cold water up north or further west. She abandons the mansion, leaving Kurt for the charlatan and evil he is, hoping the protagonist will be okay. Knowing the deal that she made with the witch, she would spare her as she wanted Gisela out of the way to get to Kurt, as she proved to be challenging to her, being the only thing in the way between her and Kurt. Kurt then instructs the protagonist to talk to the ghosts of Renata and Dmitri. If the protagonist doesn't manage calmly speaking to them, leading to either of them getting angered, she gets attacked by them yet again, ending up with Kurt pointing a gun at the protagonist, knowing that she has figured out who he really is. He reveals that the protagonist is an investigator who wanted to spy on Kurt and gather evidence for his crimes, revealing what an American is doing in the Soviet part of Germany in this period. That's when Kurt shoots the protagonist, with the witch getting there just a little too close, eventually embracing the protagonist and ending her suffering while comforting her. The witch, having found the evidence and documents incriminating Kurt, knowing about his inhumane and brutal experiments and his intentions, confronts him on how he has been fascinated with witches and has seemingly hunted them, yet not being any better himself as he's been studying them and researching on how to achieve their powers. Kurt in fact seems to be immortal, someone who has lived for centuries. His research and century-long experiments crossed many lines, experiments that at many times weren't even to advance science, but for Kurt to make a name for himself, failing many times and causing many innocents to lose their lives. The witch is even disgusted by him, feeling for the innocents who lost their lives in vain, as the witch at least had to eat and didn't kill if she didn't have to. But Kurt killed many more than any witch in history and did it all for nothing. The scene then changes to how the protagonist was actually brought to the island. The protagonist seems to have been a detective who investigated Kurt and his companions, finding out evidence that incriminated him, wanting to detain him. The protagonist seems to have intercepted Kurt and his group on a pier, trying to go back to an island when she gets knocked out by Gazella, who alongside the others carry her unconscious body and place her on a ship to the isolated island. The scene changes to a cutscene where the conversation between Dmitri and Kurt continues. Kurt explains how he wanted to make the investigator undying so that he can give her to the witch to feed on forever. If her limbs would regrow and regenerate, it would mean that the witch would never need to get out of her cabin to look for food. In this way, they can get the witch to lie to authorities about the crimes of Kurt. The cutscene taking place when the protagonist first was brought into the island, Kurt explains that they need to give her to swallow one of his hairs, just like how they did to Gazella and Renata to make her immortal. This explains the hair the protagonist felt going down her throat when she was given a glass of water was Kurt's hair, making her immortal, hence how she survived the ghost attacks over and over again. It was only at the witch's mercy when she finally managed to detach from her body with her spirit being freed. This means both Renata and Gazella are immortal too, with the witch being the only one capable of separating their spirits from their bodies. That means when the protagonist first saw herself lost in the forest, found by the group was nothing but a hoax, as she was brought there, having her memories wiped, creating a story that she was lost in the forest. Further in the conversation, we learn that Dmitri willingly consumed one of Kurt's hairs, with the two of them being friends, with Dmitri being an accomplice in performing such horrible experiments. Kurt has been obsessed with witches for so long that he studied them for centuries, someone who managed to make himself immortal, wishing that he could do what witches did naturally without the need of alchemy and experiments. It is also revealed that Kurt experimented on two people before to check if his hair would make others immortal, with these two people being none other than Clover the rabbit and Max the duck. The cutscene ending with the scene going back to the witch confronting Kurt, with Kurt saying how despite everything he wished to serve by the side of the witch, even though he explained he was horrified by what he saw with barely living people in the basement missing lambs stored as food for winter. That's when the witch says how he is worthless, pulling out a mysterious black egg and crushing it, which leads to Kurt aging rapidly until nothing is left but a skeleton, revealing how old Kurt truly would be if not for the forbidden alchemy. The black egg relates to a Russian folklore where someone casts a spell becoming immortal, becoming known as the Deathless, hiding his death inside an egg which would be hidden inside a duck, which then would be in a hair, locked in a chest buried in an isolated island. So in a way, Clover and Max, the mysterious chest buried by a tree, with all being in an isolated island, all act as a reference to this folklore. The witch, finding the buried chest and the corpses of two people, manages to find the hidden death, the black egg, which she takes with herself and crushes it in front of Kurt, which releases his death, effectively breaking the spell, killing him. Ivan, Baba Yaga, the horse, and Mariah all are interconnected to each other as well in this folklore, which needs its own video as it'll be very long to compile in this one. On the other hand, with Kurt Gunn, the protagonist investigator, alongside with Renata and Dmitri, seem to be freed from his curse, going on to a better place, not trapped in this mansion, all thanks to the witch, the Dread Witch of the East, an unlikely hero. As the witch ends up her work in the mansion, Potato approaches her, encouraging her to start alphabetically with new countries to destroy and annihilate. But Baba Yaga has other plans, wishing to change her path and become an anti-hero, killing the ones deserving, planning to go after elders, ones who don't use forbidden alchemy to achieve their powers. Regardless, Baba Yaga is not afraid and ready to head to another adventure. So according to this, the series has not ended and we should expect more hopefully from Dear Dream Studios, exploring more Slavic folklore, especially the ones that are not that popular, but are true hidden gems. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to stay tuned for all the other endings and much more by hitting on the subscribe button and the notification bell. As always, it's been your host Star, and I will see you on another one. Have a fantastic day.